mind is nothing but a massive program, circuit. Most of us live in a personality structure that was formed primarily before we're 6. Everybody creates exactly what they want, and they want exactly what they've created.
Hello, I'm Rick Yamming. Once upon a time, leadership expert Jim Farr, at the beginning of a speech, looked out at the collection of executives before him and said, "You are all crazy." He was making an important point about leadership. You must understand yourself even more than your followers if you want to lead more effectively. We rejoined Jim in conversation at his farm near Greensboro, North Carolina, as he delves into the psychological underpinnings of leadership and leads us into the realm of self-awareness.
Executives, by and large, are highly motivated people, and they're always doing the best they know how. And here I am trying to get them to change. Well, if you're doing the best you know how are you going to change? It's all downhill. So I did a little thinking and figured out that what I needed to do was create some negative feedback loops that would cause these people to experience that the best they were doing wasn't working very well, had something wrong with it. And that if I could get them to see that, they would, and did it in a manner where I showed a better way to do it, they would automatically work to change themselves. I had to find ways to set them up for this. So they're out there in the audience, and I'm supposed to be teaching them leadership, and I don't want them approaching it from the point of view of the mindset that causes their problems in the first place. So the first thing I have to do is get them on the path of changing themselves, looking at themselves. Well, they all, leaders of great ego, all are pretty satisfied with the way they are, and I start out challenging them by telling them, you are all crazy, and you don't know it, and it's interfering with your leadership. So,
and what kind of reactions do you get from them when you say that to them?
At first it's, but then I go on to make it make sense. Actually, I then get it set up in such a way that they feel pretty upset if they don't think they're crazy. Because if you are crazy and don't think you are, you won't do anything to fix it. But if you think you're crazy, you'll feel crazy not trying to.
And by crazy, you mean what?
Well, I tell them, hey, let me define crazy. I've told you you're crazy, and Americans don't like to be told they're crazy. So let me tell you, you don't know what I've said about you, so let me tell you what that is. And crazy means 3 things. First, it means that you are the creator of your universe. You're God in your experiential universe. You know, you're not God, but you are the only creator within you. Nobody and nothing creates in your experience but you. And you have to be crazy to create some of the crap you've created when you're in charge. The second aspect of crazy is, and it took me years of doing counseling and therapy to catch on to this, everybody creates exactly what they want, and they want exactly what they've created. Now, despite the fact that it's giving them great pain and trouble, it doesn't mean you want the consequence, but you're always doing what you choose and want to do, whether it's working or not. So the second aspect of being crazy is that you're doing it to yourself, and including the negatives. That's crazy. The third part of crazy is that you don't know you're doing this. And since your craziness is creating negatives that you don't know you're creating, you look around to find causes, and since it's not you, you look out there. And you blame them, or it, or the world. And you try to fix it out there. And since the cause is in here, nothing to do out there changes it. And the negative in your life keeps right on going as you create it and don't know it. But once they catch on to the possibility that they are doing these kinds of things to themselves from unawareness, they get fairly open to trying to find out what those things are in themselves.
What kind of examples would you give them of unawareness activities that they might be engaging in automatically without even knowing it?
Oh, there's a lot of them, especially for the executives. I'll say, for example, one of the common problems I see with executives is that they will have a shop where they're not disciplined. They have people who are not conforming and not cooperating. There's negative behavior out there that's interfering. But the leader does nothing because unconsciously the leader has a very strong need to be liked and a great fear of offending or angering anybody. So they try to do their leadership while being not ever offending anybody. So they won't discipline. They won't tell people what they don't like about their performance because they're unconsciously afraid the employee will get angry, the follower will get angry and reject them. So they go along afraid to confront as needed for discipline and control. Another one is very common among leaders is, where does the motivation come to become a leader? In many cases, it's to prove that an unconscious belief that I'm stupid, weak, and incompetent is not true. So I go out and I set up an act in my life of becoming strong, confident, capable, and achieving, all to prove to my unconscious self that it isn't true, that I'm unworthy or inadequate.
And so what is happening is this unawareness, which we're getting ready to move into here at some length, this unawareness is putting a ceiling on the growth of leaders. Would you say they can only go so far if they don't deal with this?
Not exactly. What I just said in part was their motivation to become leaders in many cases is a compensation for the negative belief they unconsciously hold. So out of that negativeness comes their drive to succeed. I say that I think about 80% of the world's achievement is a function of leaders going out there proving they're not stupid in response to an unconscious belief.
A negative creating a positive.
Negative self-image. And they compensate by going out to prove to themselves that they're capable.
But they are nonetheless limited to some degree, are they not, then by this unconscious activity that's going on inside their head?
Well, with many people, for instance, if they're not out achieving and getting feedback that they're capable and that they're measuring up, they may develop anxiety. So you commonly get somebody that you call a workaholic. The only time they can relax is when they're working. They can't enjoy vacations. If they're out on vacation, they call the office all the time. And they overdrive themselves because when they're not, this negative ground of being, as we call it, generates anxiety and unconsciously.
Okay, this seems like a good point to go right into this business of unawareness, negative ground of being. So lay out your theory about how this works.
Well, as I said before, humans operate through their mind and their personality. The mind is nothing but a massive program, circuits, hardwiring in the mind. If there's an event out here, it's perceived, and the energy goes through whatever circuit is there and into whatever outcome that is set up there. It's a physiological, hardwired system of programs that shape what you see and what you do. Now, I call those programs beliefs. And I'm using that broadly because some of the beliefs are conscious. If you're aware of them, you call them beliefs or attitudes or values or morals or ethics. You give them a name. But many of them you're not aware of. They're there. You're not conscious of them. But they operate on their own anyhow, just as you're not aware of the programs in the computer, but the computer does what it does, and you get on the screen the product of the button you push plus all the circuits you can't see. Well, the same happens in your mind. You, in running your life, can only do it deliberately in terms of those beliefs you're aware of, conscious of. The ones you're unconscious of work just as do the ones you're conscious of, except you have no awareness of them and no control over them. So they are on automatic. Now, the way it works, if you look at the mind, the way to look at it is on this half of the mind, you have the programs that are conscious and aware. They're the ones you think are you and the ones you believe in, and the ones that you think are running your choices and your behaviors. Well, on the other side of the mind, on the unaware side of the mind, you have exactly the same kinds of beliefs and programs, which are out of your control because they're unconscious. Now, the problem is that a good share of those unconscious programs, you made them unconscious because they're negative and self-destructive. If you get that picture that you're unlovable or you're unworthy or you're stupid, which is very painful, and you can't change the environment, turns out you discover you have the ability to push it out of mind, be unaware of it, and then you don't feel so badly anymore. So now you're running around with an unconscious belief that you're inadequate and a conscious belief that you're perfectly okay. Now you go out then to run your life according to your conscious belief, and you work to be a good, smart person or a good achiever. But every time you go out to achieve, back here is a belief that says if you try it, you're going to fail, and if you fail, then nobody's going to love you, and you're going to be whatever, the child. So that every time you're doing what you are set consciously to do, it's contradicting the negative belief. It's contradicting the positive belief and fitting the negative belief. Well, as you start taking on the job, let's say you're an executive and you get promoted, you get higher and higher level. The higher you go, the tougher the problems, the more likely you're going to fail over here. So that as you take on the problem and the challenge which you like, it activates this, you're not going to make it, which then translates into fear in your body.
So you're at war with yourself.
So you now have a fear created from an unconscious belief that you can't do what you are consciously setting out to do. Now, when you get the fear, you may be aware of the fear, or it may be unconscious. It may go into the body, and you get hypertension and high blood pressure and all these kinds of things blocking the fear. Or it may come out as anxiety, which you then run around and try to deal with.
But you don't necessarily know why this is taking place. You just know that those feelings are there.
You don't even know that it is taking place. If the fear is conscious, if you're anxious, you maybe, what generally you will do, if you get fear from nowhere, and if it's coming from a belief you don't know you have, then the fear seems to be coming from nowhere. That makes you feel crazy. So what you then do is find ways to rationalize, to justify being afraid. So you can look out there and say, they're trying to get me fired. And now it makes sense that you're afraid.
But the tendency then is to assume, because these feelings are coming from someplace you don't understand, that some external force is at play.
In an extreme case, for instance, that's where paranoid comes from. They're getting fear activated from nowhere, and they see the world as a totally threatening place. That's if they're severely neurotic or psychotic. But it happens in leaders. They believe that people don't, unconsciously, that they're not powerful and respected. And therefore, they can see attack in the slightest criticism. And that what happens with them as leaders is their people learn very quickly not to give negative feedback to the leader, who therefore operates blind to what's going wrong in the operation, because this person unconsciously overreacts and overdefends and gets aggressive if somebody comes in and says, what you're having us do isn't working.
And it's not necessarily your fault that this is all transpired this way, because this was unconsciously, to a great degree, put into place when you were a 6-year-old child.
No, it's your fault in the sense you meant it, but you programmed it. Nobody can program in you but you, and that, unfortunately, you do most of your personality building before you're 6. You're not very knowledgeable. Most of us live in a personality structure that was formed primarily before we're 6. And here we are, 36, living with a personality that suited a 6-year-old child in terms of how we handle anger, fear, ego.
And when these threats were presented to you in some form or another when you're under 6 years old, you have no cognitive ability to understand exactly what it is that's happening. You just know that it is a threat, and therefore...
You perceive it as a threat.
You perceive it as a threat, and you think you're going to die.
You're going to die, you're going to lose your parent. It activates survival fear. And at this point, they're not deliberately creating themselves. They're reacting automatically, and they take in what works and put it in place as a program. They avoid what doesn't work, so they have a program not to do that. Well, if you have parents, for instance, that the only thing that works where you can feel safe is that you always please them, and if you don't, they get very angry. This person's going to grow up with unconsciously afraid of anger, and will therefore, as a leader, not do things that might anger someone, even though that's what's required for good leadership.
It's important to me also to hear you say that it's not that you may not see any outward manifestation of this. Are you saying you may not see any fear? You may, not feel any fear. You may not feel anything in your body, and still it is operating. So it's in your behavior that it is transpiring.
This stimulus can hit an unaware program which triggers fear. The fear, you may also have learned to make yourself unaware of the fear. If you do that, you can block the fear in your body. And that means you can get vasoconstriction, or you get tense muscles, you get the hypertensive person, and it can turn into ulcers and colitis. Physical disorders, as the body blocks fear, and that energy is disrupting, or it can come through into awareness, but then you don't know the cause, so what you're aware of is kind of a free-floating anxiety. But since that's very uncomfortable, you develop a lifestyle of trying to avoid this anxiety. Now, if it turns out the way to do that is to work, then you become a workaholic. A very common pattern is parents cause their children to see, if you make a mistake, you're in hot water. Do it right. Rah, 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 rah. They don't give them room for error. And these people are very apt to develop an act of being careful, conscientious, productive, and responsible. And they're very apt, therefore, to go out to try to become a leader. That's a good way to do that. Only now, as they're leading and trying to get things done, they're always facing the possibilities of making a mistake, which activates the fear, so they become perfectionistic, over-controlling, very careful. And they over-control when they delegate, or they have to check it all themselves. And they're so careful, they rule out any errors, and it rules out creativity. So you get these nitpicking, perfectionistic, over-controlling leaders that the only people who will stay around and follow them are those who want to be told exactly what to do and have no creativity and no drive of their own.
And they're acting as 6-year-old children, basically.
Well, since almost everybody is acting as like 6-year-old children, we program our personality mostly before we're 6. People think they're born with their personalities. You're only born with characteristics that will, in my opinion, set the direction in which you move to shape your personality, but you learn your personality.
So, if we learn our personality and are not simply born with it, we can also change it, allowing us freedom from living as helpless psychological robots whose habits are fixed and on automatic. But how do you begin to reprogram yourself? How hard is that? That's next in our conversation with Jim Farr.